Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Missouri Legislative Update. This month we report to you from the upper gallery of the Senate chamber. In this month's program, we recap the last month of the 2014 legislative session before the final gavel fell in mid-May. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate.
And reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives, I'm Jonathan Lorenz. The Missouri House put the final touches on the General Assembly's successful override of Governor Nixon's veto of a controversial tax cut bill. In this month's top story, we take a look at how lawmakers were able to force the income tax cut into law.
All those in favor will vote yes, any opposed will vote no.
The Missouri House of Representatives put the final stamp of approval needed to overturn the governor's veto of Senate Bill 509. Passed earlier in session, the Senate bill reduces the income tax rate for a majority of Missourians from 6% to 5.5% over a 5-year period. The legislation doesn't take effect until 2017, and it only kicks in if the state sees increased revenue.
And today, with the help of the Senate, the House, Republicans, a brave Democrat, we have carried this bill across the finish line. I truly believe this will bring more growth, more opportunity, more prosperity for more Missourians.
The legislation requires revenue to grow by $150 million before any income tax cut can take effect. Senate Bill 509 carries a $620 million price tag, a number one opponent claims could be devastating to the state's most vulnerable citizens.
If we blow this hole in the budget through reduced business taxes and reduced income taxes, ultimately we're going to make up for it in other ways, and that's going to be through fees and sales taxes, which is going to shift the tax burden, in my opinion, to lower income Missourians.
Members of the Missouri House voted by a 109-46 vote to overturn the governor's veto and force Senate Bill 509 into law.
The Senate also received the 2/3 majority vote needed, a total of 23 in the upper chamber, to successfully override the governor's veto of Senate Bills 509 and 496, sponsored by Senator Will Kraus of Lee Summit. Here are some lawmakers' remarks before the veto override in the Senate.
Mr. President, I move that Senate Substitute Number 3 for Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 509 and 496 be passed, the objections of the governor thereto notwithstanding.
That I believe we should be the show me state, not the me too state. Because this bill and this idea originally came to our Ways and Means Committee as Kansas is doing this great thing. They're cutting it in a similar manner. They're cutting it in the similar type things, and we should have to compete with them.
We are not fully funding the foundation formula, a formula that pays for our K through 12 education. We are severely underfunding higher ed in the state of Missouri. We have refused to expand Medicaid and accept those dollars and those jobs that would come in through Medicaid expansion. We are on the wrong track. It is about priorities. This, to me, is a misplaced priority. This
bill is a fiscally sound bill in the aspect that it's 2-year delay. We take 5 years to phase in with triggers of $150 million. We've got protections in here for the low-income Missourians with the additional $500 deduction. And on top of the $500 deduction, we've got the cost of inflation for the brackets to go up, once again, putting the lowest income earners in the state of Missouri in a lower bracket, which cuts more taxes for them. This bill has gone a long ways to put the protections and to safeguard Missouri taxpayers, and I believe it's the right thing to do.
From cutting taxes to allocating how your tax dollars are spent, the Missouri Senate finished its work on finalizing the 2015 fiscal year state operating budget 1 day ahead of schedule. Before budgeting for fiscal year 2015 even began late last year, lawmakers in the House and Senate and officials from the governor's office could not agree on a consensus revenue estimate, the baseline on which the budget is created. Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Kurt Schaefer of Columbia describes how this year's budget process was different.
And as a result, the House and Senate agreed to a lower number. And one thing we did in the budget was we did create the budget surplus fund, which is the difference between the House and the Senate's consensus revenue estimate and the governor's. So there are a few things that are funded out of that budget surplus fund where if the governor's right and that money comes in, then it will stand appropriated to those projects. And if not, then there won't be funding for those projects.
Included in the $26.4 billion budget is a $114.8 million increase for the state's K-12 school foundation formula, with $3.1 billion in basic state aid for education, $43.3 million for performance-based funding for higher education institutions. That's a 5% total increase for 2- and 4-year public institutions, along with additional funding for several scholarship programs. $14.2 million for a 25-year planned bonding proposal for the Fulton State Hospital, and $198 million authorized to construct the state's new maximum security mental health facility.
I would consider this a great accomplishment because a lot of us have been here a while and we just kind of kicked it down the can down the road and just thinking this is an awful situation, nothing is done. And so I want to compliment you and the others that were so instrumental in doing that. And this is something great. And for the clients that are there and for the people that have to work there, and it's just, I think, one of the shining examples of what we got done in this budget. So thank you.
The budget also includes more than $48 million in additional funding to restore dental benefits for Medicaid-eligible adults, and more than $11 million in additional funding for the Children's Division child welfare programs.
Senator, I also wanted to thank you for paying attention to and looking into the issue with the Children's Division. It means a lot to me personally, and I appreciate that. And I'm also very appreciative of the $48 million on the dental. That's a big deal. It's going to help a lot of folks. It's an issue that I've been hearing about the whole 8 years that I've been down here, and it was a big deal to get there.
If you ignore dental care, it leads to bigger, more expensive health problems. And so it's actually a good investment of taxpayer money to provide some basic dental care.
While lawmakers applaud and share their disappointment about various funding items, the Senate Appropriations Chairman reminds everyone how the budget process is completely different year after year.
This idea that somehow we fund something and it's that way for eternity, that's just not how the state budgets, it's not how programs work. And so I think whether it's Medicaid or any other program, you'll see things ebb and flow as the economy goes and as priorities are determined based on how much money is available.
The 2015 fiscal year begins July 1st and runs through June 30th, 2015.
The Missouri House of Representatives put the final stamp of approval on a proposal allowing families to use hemp oil as a means to treat epilepsy. Through the legislation, lawmakers hope to give families another option when it comes to dealing with this devastating disorder. The Missouri House of Representatives sent a legislative proposal to the governor's desk aiming to help families treat epilepsy. House Bill 2238 allows the Department of Agriculture to grow hemp in order for families to use the hemp oil as a way to treat epilepsy. Commonly referred to as CBD oil, it is extracted from industrial-grade hemp and processed into oil. Currently, there is no cure for epilepsy, but the usage of CBD oil has proven to be a viable option to treat the devastating seizures associated with epilepsy.
You can go back home to your districts and you can tell people that you've helped children, that you've helped parents. And realistically, you may have even saved lives.
Not just anyone can get CBD oil. The legislation requires individuals to meet certain criteria, including a statement of proof from a neurologist. It also only allows minors to use the oil as a form of treatment. However, not everyone supports the proposal. Some argue this controversial treatment should not be on the table.
What I agree with is science, some science-based research that would say, here's the cause and effect by using this, we've measured it, and this is a safe opportunity because we may be promoting an issue where it may be detrimental to someone's child.
If you want to go to experts, we can all wheel our experts in here and we'll have a real dandy day of everybody saying, yes, you're right, and no, you're wrong. With that, Madam Speaker, I would hope that the body will side on the chance for life, the chance for hope, the chance for treatment.
The Missouri House passed the legislation with more than 135 yes votes. Earlier in the day, the Missouri Senate approved the proposal without any opposition.
Today is a remarkable day in the history of the state of Missouri. With the passage of House Bill 2238, we're publicly acknowledging that cannabis plant possesses medical value.
You can't get high on this. It only has that medicinal value of the high CBD levels. And we're setting up a regulatory framework that's very cautious. And in fact, you could make the argument that we would maybe want to do it another way, but we wanted to avoid, at this late date in session, any groups having real opposition to this. And I think we've done this and crafted this in a way where it can actually happen in the state.
The legislation now sits on the governor's desk for his consideration.
After the break, one of the state's top newsmakers sits down with the vice chair of the House Budget Committee to discuss the General Assembly's spending plan for 2015. That's when we return on Missouri Legislative Update.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
Welcome to Capital Dialogue. I'm Bob Priddy from the Missourinet and the Missouri Channel. We're glad to have you with us. We're talking about the state budget on this segment of our program, and we're going to be talking with Representative Tom Flanigan, who is from Southwest Missouri and is the Vice Chairman of the House Budget Committee. Now, that's a committee that's made up, as I understand it, of the chairman of all of the subcommittees of budget.
All the subcommittees. It's the largest committee in the House. It's 29 members, and we represent all areas of the state.
How many different subcommittees of the Budget Committee?
Six. The Appropriations Committees are all subcommittees.
Okay. Well, this is a long process that started for it. The budget starts in the House of Representatives. You folks start looking at it with committee hearings and even studying various documents late in the previous calendar year. When did you actually start looking at how this budget started to shape up?
We started looking on July the 1st at the beginning of the fiscal year, this fiscal year, and we held informational hearings throughout the summer and into the fall. A key date for us is October the 1st. That is the date that the executive departments have to report their new decision items to the Office of Administration. We get a copy of those, and we have some clue at that point of what the governor may or may not propose as far as new spending.
Now, how difficult is it to start this process at the beginning of the fiscal year, not knowing what kind of money is going to come in for the fiscal year that starts a year from when you begin it?
But there's always information that needs to be discerned, and that information is always ongoing. All the programs we have in the state are ongoing. Social Services never stops. Department of Revenue never stops. And so the programs that those departments administer and the other departments in the state are always ongoing. So you get feedback to find out, how are you doing? Are you doing what's going? Are you doing what's right? Is there anything we can do to help you? And we get feedback just from the metrics, the outcomes, and to see if the programs are working.
Now, every year the budget seems to be getting a little bit larger than the year before, except when we had the down years, of course, during the recession, and we had some cutbacks. But how often during this process of a budget that grows do you find within that budget things that you start to cut back on, or things that aren't working that you eliminate?
Well, Bob, what we do is this. When I first started off on the Budget Committee in 2008, when I was elected to the House, the House budget was $21 billion. This year's state budget is $26.6 billion. It has grown that much in a very short, 6-year period of time. So what we have to do is we always are constantly going back and looking at the programs. On my wall, I'm probably the only member of the House who has, I have 4x4 spreadsheets on Department of Social Services that tell me line item by line item how those programs have functioned, how much money we put into them, how much money they spent, how much money the governor's withheld from them. It's a rolling spreadsheet, so I'll go back 5 years. But I can tell by looking at that and calling in the department heads to find out what's working, what's not working, what's the governor proposing we do here. And so it's an evaluation statistically, but it's about the only way that we can get a hold of it as budgeteers.
Just out of curiosity, when you're not here, what do you do back home for a living?
I study the budget. No, I was in financial services for over 20 years. So studying the budget, doing numbers is pretty much what I've done.
But a lot of the people on the committee do not have the kind of background you do.
No, they don't.
Is it difficult for them?
It is a process of education, especially in times of term limits, to figure out who knows what, how much they know, and how interested that they are in the whole process itself. I'm very interested in how this process operates. It's the one thing we're constitutionally required to do in this state, and I take it very seriously.
One of the things that most folks don't recognize when they talk about a $26, $27 billion budget is how little of that $26 or $27 billion the legislature actually can manipulate, that you could, that is yours to play with, if you will, but it's not really
for state government. Well, actually, 2/3 of the Missouri state budget is federal money, and they come in terms of mandates from the federal government to continue certain programs. For example, Medicaid. Medicaid, the cost to continue certain programs like Medicaid is $75 million, whether we do anything or not. So a lot of social service programs are that way. Highway transportation programs are just, we're kind of a pass-through conduit to the agency itself. So what we end up with is about 1/3, about $8 billion or and this year's $9 billion, a little over $9 billion, which you would think that would be a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But the problem with $9 billion is it has to wrap around a constantly expanding base. At some point, you have to make a decision of what is important to fund. And that's where the purpose of the Budget Committee comes in, and that's where the House debate comes in.
People who are running for this office or other offices, people who are in this office, often talk about WFA, waste, fraud, and abuse. You've been working on this budget for a number of years now. How much waste, fraud, and abuse is there?
I can't put a number on it, but I can tell you that but in social services alone, there are fraud control units within social services and also within the Attorney General's office that work very diligently to ferret out that sort of thing. We have funded a new computer system for social services so that they can better track the people that are on their programs and also track them through not only social services but the other programs that they may receive.
So is waste, fraud, and abuse a nice campaign theme to talk about? But
no,
once you get into here, it's hard to really pin it down?
It's hard to pin it down because it's difficult, but that's why you have units that do that. Now, you got part-time people come in like myself. It may look like waste, fraud, and abuse to me. It may be the letter of the law. I may not agree with the law, but that may be how it is.
Since you're with the social services part of the budget, that's one part of the budget that really touches people intimately, very closely, perhaps more than many other parts of the budget. Mm-hmm. Do you feel any kind of a personal responsibility toward an agency that deals so intimately with Missourians?
We interact a great deal with the heads of the people that run social services. Brian Kincaid and his staff, we are constantly talking to them. We're talking to the Appropriations Committee that oversees their budget. And we feel like we have a very good working relationship on what's going on, but that department alone is so large and affects so many people, it's almost impossible, and as a part-time legislator, to get your hands around the entire item.
You talked about Medicaid just briefly in some of your remarks earlier. This year, the legislature decided not to expand Medicaid, not to get into this new federal program. Why not?
Can't afford it. On down the road, Bob, we cannot afford a hit to a general revenue of $200 million or more, which is a number that has been bandied around when the federal money runs out that we have to supplant. We can't do that, and still fund. We only have two places to go in the state that have large sums of money that are spent there: education and social services. It's a conundrum. If you take Medicaid expansion and you put 1.1 million people on that program, and you have to fund it, where's the money going to come from to essentially fund it? Well, it's going to come from either education, children, schools, classrooms, or it's going to come from social services and the things that they do. It can't be done.
But in this legislative session, there's been a rather substantial tax cut enacted over the governor's veto. And had you not done that, would that money not have been available for
No,
Medicaid
that tax
expansion?
cut, Bob, was one over a 10-year period of time. It had a lot of triggers into it. It actually required the state budget to grow by $150 million in order to come into play. Today, state revenues are down into the negative numbers. We're down 0.06%. We're not even playing even par with what the CRE was in December.
Consensus revenue estimate, CRE, that's the agreement that the legislature makes among the House and the Senate, and usually the governor's office agrees too on, but this time it didn't. How much of a problem was that in dealing with the budget this year?
Well, what we did this year was when the governor predicted that the revenues in the state would grow 5.8%. Today, we're not even above the bottom line. The House predicted 2% growth. We're still below that. What we did was we took last year's truly agreed, finally passed bills and used those as a basis to budget. In other words, we were plussing up, adding to the budget as we went through the process.
So you've kind of got another category over here that if the income of the state comes in above what you folks believe it will, you can put that there, and you will have a way to have money available for these programs, kind of on a contingency basis.
It's a surplus revenue fund. It is one where, if it does come in, if the governor's correct, in the last 60 days here or so of this fiscal year, things turn around and the money starts flowing in, that money would go into the surplus revenue fund.
When we return, we continue our discussion on the budget with Senator Scott Sifton of Affton. Stay tuned.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money.
We're talking with Senator Scott Sifton from St. Louis, who's on the Senate Budget Committee. This is his second time around in this legislative session to work on the Budget Committee. Last year was his first as a rookie. Tell me how someone who has not had a lot of experience dealing with this issue gets his hands around something like $26 to $27 billion package.
You know, it is quite a process, and it's sort of like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot of detail in that budget. We have a stack of budget books that collectively is about a foot tall, and we go through it line by line. The committee takes time while the House is doing its piece on the budget to hear from all of the agencies, go over the governor's recommendations so that when the House sends the budget over, we've actually already been through it once, and then we're down to the short strokes of whether we go with the governor's recommendation, go with the House's recommendation, or do something different. And depending on the item, it could go any of those three ways.
Talk to me about the decision-making process. How arbitrary is it?
You know, from a political science academic standpoint, incrementalism is a dominant concept. There was a fad in the late 70s of going to zero-based budget, just throwing out last year's budget and starting from scratch. The reality is the best prognosticator of what next year's budget is going to be is what this year's budget is. And so for the most part, we are working at the margins, and there is relatively very little that changes a lot in a hurry. And most of the big ticket items are the subject of extensive discussion, particularly state employee pay and, for instance, education formula funding. So we have discussions on the big ticket items. Most of the rest of what transpires is at the margins of the budget.
The top two things in the Constitution that the legislature is required to do is pay the state's debt and finance education.
Yes.
How hard is it to pay? The debt is kind of a number that you have that's a hard number you can put down on the page right there.
And as a AAA bond-rated state, at least for the time being, we'll see what the effect of last week's tax cut might be on that. But for the moment, we're a state that pays very little for the debt that it carries, and we are very fortunate to be that way.
But then you move on to elementary and secondary education funding.
Yes.
And we've been below the goals that the legislature set for a number of years,
yes,
for several years now. We've made some progress this year. How did you decide what the number was going to be that we advanced this year?
In essence, based on what we projected revenue to be coming in. Before the legislative session, we arrived at the consensus revenue estimate. This year there was a difference between the legislator's projection for new revenue and the governor's. So the governor's budget was based on a higher assumption of increased revenue, the House and Senate on a lower assumption. And unfortunately, what we've seen to this point in the year is that even the House and Senate estimate for new revenue is rosy, and actual revenue gain has been nominal to negative. So we are concerned that even though we were able to put more than $250 million back into the education funding formula this year, none of that may materialize. And if we don't get the revenue gain that we projected at the start of the year, the governor may be forced to withhold.
But to listen to the governor, who's a member of your party,
yes,
things are going swimmingly as far as the economic recovery is concerned. What do you learn from the experts about why the revenue seems to not be adding up?
You know, a host of different reasons. One particular piece of it that I think may have something to do with it, we actually had a pretty healthy gain in capital gains revenue in 2013 because of the end of the dividend and capital gains tax cut in Washington. If you remember the fiscal cliff right after the election in 12, A whole lot of people took gains in the market right after that happened, right at the start of 2013. That all came to, the capital gains tax on that all came to the state of Missouri for FY14. And of course, we haven't had that happen again. So completely apart from the broader economic trends, there are other specific reasons why revenue might not be where we would have thought. The other thing is we're in the process of phasing out the the corporate franchise tax in Missouri. So, and that's a 5-year phase in, and so every year we're losing a modest 8-figure number in revenue, 10, 20 million a year from that. The other thing we've seen is a continued erosion in the sales tax base due to internet sales and our failure to do anything to capture that revenue as a state. To do it in a big way would require congressional action, but we continue to see our sales tax base erode even at a time when the economy is growing and we're gaining jobs again.
You mentioned early on the hearings that you have at the various state agencies, but early, before you even start the session, quite often the Senate Appropriations Committee has hearings where real people come in from the street with their concerns, with their issues, with their pleas for help. How hard is it for you and the other committee members, knowing what you've heard from these people about what their needs are, to basically come down to this point where the budget has been passed, where you've had to say to many of them, sorry, you're out of luck?
There are always people that would love to see things done that we just can't afford to do, and particularly at this moment in our state's history when we have just emerged from one of the most protracted downturns in revenue that we have ever experienced in several lifetimes. We are finally at a point where we are hopeful that we are not going to continue to have to cut general revenue by hundreds of millions, and so right at this moment we are finally starting to see a better environment, and so you've got a lot of pent-up demand. People that have taken cuts for the last 5 years want their cuts restored. People who have been waiting 5 years to push a new agenda are now back at the table. And the reality is we wind up saying no a lot. In some ways, and it's always challenging to write a $26 million budget, but in some ways people are more understanding when revenue is bad and everybody's getting cut, and they understand that they're not going to get an increase and maybe they're going to get a decrease. It's a little harder when there's so much hope and expectation for revenue gain on the other side. Invariably I think people are more frustrated in that scenario.
One thing not in this year's budget is $2 billion federal dollars for the expansion of Medicaid.
That's absolutely right. The better part of $5 million a day our state is leaving on the table. And we are still working. We have 1 week left in session. We are still working to try to get Medicaid expansion through the legislature. We will see what happens by the end of the week, but we are leaving our people uninsured. We are leaving money on the table. We are subsidizing health care in other states, and we are straining our health care system in a way that I don't think it can endure for very long. So it is imperative that we take action. Disappointed that Medicaid expansion was not in this year's budget, but hopefully we will take action this week on that issue, and if failing that, we'll be right back in the batter's box next year.
And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions about the legislation that appeared in this program, please visit our website at senate.mo.gov. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House, you can visit our website at house.mo.gov. For all of us with Missouri Legislative Update, thanks for watching.